Alrighty then. Hello, four beers. How's it going tonight? This is Lower the Trap, the Lobster Chronicles, and hopefully we can hear a few seagulls in the midst. There we go. You can hear one, two. Right now we are the Cold Puddle on page 96. So 1, 2, as you can see here. Here's our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 chapters. We're on Cold Puddle chapter 10 of the Lobster Chronicles. And chapter 10, great book, Lobster Chronicles, The Lower the Trap. And this book here is, we've mentioned it a couple of times, hopefully, is Jessica Scott Kerrin, and illustrations by Shelagh Armstrong. So great illustrations, quite lifelike. Let's go with page 96. Page 96. With a few of the visitors to Crystal Lake. Not too far from just over there. If you go that way, there's Maud Clifford. So there's a Nova Scotia Christmas trees. None other than behind me here from the wedding quite a while ago, I think now. We gave out Nova Scotia Christmas trees to the guests up in Cape Breton when we were married. Cold Puddle. Now, Cold Puddle, it's interesting. You got a phone. Looks like a knife and a little bit of a jar. So, kind of predicting on what might happen here. It was not long before everyone on Norris's list found out about Graham's hurtful investigation, and he was confronted over and over. When did you get so sneaky? How am I supposed to trust you ever again? I thought you were smarter than that. For once, Graham had no answers. Instead, he sat alone at recess, listlessly turning the pages of the Cold Marine Tanks magazine, must be. Clearly he was not as clever as he had thought he was, and now everybody in Lower Narrow Spit knew that too. Graham hung his head. It did not help that Norris kept insisting his dad would bid high on the giant lobster. You know what I think? He told Graham on his way to the playground. You're mad at me now, but after you spend the prize money at Big Fish Aquarium, you'll forget all about it, if you ask me. Graham ceased. See how I did that word? Teeth, but I just changed it to the S. Ceased. How would he, or anyone else for that matter, forget about the whole story mess once the gigantic lobster was permanently mounted as a trophy in the Lucky Catch Cannery for the entire community to witness? The bigger realization plagued Graham all day long. When the end of school bell rang and Graham escaped for home, he saw that there was no new floaters in his saltwater tub. But even that gave him precious little satisfaction. Graham sat head in his hands and tried to organize his jagged thoughts. he could not let Norris's dad win the lobster. That was for certain, yet he desperately wanted to go on his trip. So there would have to be another bidder. But who? Think. Then it hit him like a tidal wave. There was another logical bidder for the giant lobster, of course. Big Fish Aquarium. Graham dashed downwards to the kitchen. He picked up the telephone, which was on the counter next to the trail of breadcrumbs and half-licked knife with strawberry jam on it. Would Lynette ever learn to clean up her mess? "Hello, operator," said Graham after dialing information. "Would you please put me through to Big Fish Aquarium?" Graham listened to the rings while his heart pounded in his chest like the diesel engine on the harmonious to fighting gale force winds. Then he stepped into a cold puddle. Lynette must have knocked over Fetch's water dish in her haste. "Geez Louise. Good afternoon. This is Big Fish Aquarium. How can I help you? May I please speak to the chief marine biologist?" asked Graham, using his best telephone etiquette while hopping on one foot and peeling off his wet sock. Certainly. As Graham listened to the beep sounds, he grabbed Lynette's Raggedy Ann doll from a kitchen chair and used it to mop up the floor with his foot. And then, "Richard Zwicker speaking. Are you the chief marine biologist?" asked Graham, standing bolt upright. "That's me," said a amused voice. Graham took a deep, steadying breath. "My name is Graham Swinimer, and my dad caught a giant lobster. It's in the tank at the Lower Narrow Spit Community Museum. It will be put up for sale at the Lobster Festival's auction this weekend, and I think your aquarium might want to buy it, right? I read about your lobster in the Daily Story. It's an amazing catch. So do you think you'll come and bid? Let me ask you this. Is it healthy?" "You bet," said Graham. "I've been feeding it and watching the water temperature and the salt levels and recording everything in my scientific journal." "Interesting," said the marine biologist. There was a thoughtful pause. "I'll have to check with my director, but I think your giant lobster might make a fine specimen for our tank on northern waters, and I'd love to get out for a dive." "The last time I was in your bay was years ago because of a dead finback had washed ashore. Our neighbors have one of those bones in their garden," said Graham, "and my dad can take you out on his boat," he added, grasping for anything that might clinch the deal. "He's a lobster fisherman." "Okay, then, I'll see what I can do." When Graham hung up, his hand was shaking, although he could not tell if it was from the excitement or relief or the promise of revenge. As soon as Graham's dad came through the mudroom door, Graham told him about his well-timed call to Big Fish. "And I talked to a real marine biologist," explained Graham proudly. "I think he's going to come and bid." "That's good news," said Graham's dad. "A bidding war will bring in more money for the community as well as earn us the prize for our trip." He yanked off his rubber boots, then went into the kitchen to wash his hands before starting supper. While he splashed at the sink, he added, Looks like it's clear sailing to big fish from here on in." Reassured by his dad's optimism, Graham stood at the living room window and watched the tide turn. He reached out his hand with such confidence he could almost touch the mouth of the harbor that led to the seascape beyond. The confidence was not misplaced. Sure enough, Richard Zwicker stopped by the community museum on the day of the auction, just as Graham pressed the lid back on the ice cream bucket. "This is a fine specimen, Graham," he remarked as he stood in front of the gigantic lobster's tank. "Be sure to save me a seat for the bidding." Then he set off with Mrs. Carrington to view the remaining displays. The rest of the day was a sleepwalk. Graham barely took in any of the festival's events: the lobster boat races, the parade, the chowder contest. Only the Princess Mermaid and King Neptune pageant managed to wake him up. When the time came for Lynette to step forward to give up her crown to the next princess recipient, she instead grabbed the lobster cape from Ferguson's mum and made for the occasion and bolted from I'll catch up with you at the supper. No, sorry, I missed something here. Where was I? Oh my. Only the Princess Mermaid and King Neptune pageant managed to wake him up. When the time came for Lynette to step forward to give up her crown for the next princess recipients, she grabbed the cape from Ferguson's mum had made for the occasion and bolted from the stage in hysterics. "I'll catch up with you at the supper," his dad called to Graham in the crowd as he headed after Lynette. The community supper of boiled lobsters, potato salad and blueberry buckle sold out, and once fed, everyone rushed to the chairs that had been lined up in the old dance hall for the auction. Graham managed to grab 3 seats that were only a few rows back from the front podium. His dad sat on his dad sat on one side. Big Fish Cheap Marine biologist sat on the other, and Lynette sat at the home, grounded by her babysitter Violet for company. Now Graham was on full alert. He surveyed the room to see who else was in the audience, while several reporters and camera operators stood along the aisles, recording the whole event. Norris and Norris's dad were plunked down front and center. Right behind them was Mrs. Kerrigan, sporting a museum polo shirt, and her son Alan had rolled up the auction program to fire spitballs at the back of Norris's head whenever Mrs. Carrington was not looking. Nearby was Mrs. Penfield, showing off her new plump-cheeked baby to Ferguson's gushing sister during the supper. Graham was not pleased to to over here. We're going to have to stop.